Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. One of the most incredible abilities that humans as a species have is our ability to form abstractions and to use those abstractions to make our life easier and to do things with lower cognitive load. Now, let me break that down. The dictionary definition of an abstraction is the process of considering something independently of its associations or attributes. And everything I've said for the last minute sounds rather complicated. So let me break this down even further. A very simple example of an abstraction is, imagine if you were with a small child. It could be your niece, your nephew, your children, but a small child, and you've gone to an ice cream vendor with that child. And that child is very young, they may be 4 to 5 years old, and you want to teach them how to go and purchase an ice cream themselves. So you might hand that child a note of currency. I'm going to hand that child a $5 note, and I will say, please go ask that man or that lady, point to the ice cream you want, and just hand them the note and say please and thank you, and they'll give you an ice cream back. Now, in telling that child what to do to buy and attain their ice cream, all I've said is hand the money over, say these words, and you'll get an ice cream. I've created an abstraction for that child. Now, what actually happened was that child had to speak a language that was understood by the person selling the ice cream, so they needed to mutually understand each other. They had to have a value of currency that each party recognized. So they had to have a common currency. So in which case, in my example, is the Australian dollar. And the child has to have that, and the other person on the other end has to accept that currency. There has to be a price that's agreed on, and they've made a deal. And the deal is I will exchange money and you will give me an ice cream, and the child receives the ice cream. They may also receive some change as part of that transaction. But I have not gone and explained all that extra detail to the child. I've simply said, say please, point to the ice cream, hand the note, take the ice cream and any change that's received, and that's it. I've abstracted away the complicated and unnecessary details that are completely irrelevant to enabling that small child to undertake the transaction of being able to purchase an ice cream. And that's what an abstraction is. It's an incredibly powerful concept. And as somebody who works as a software engineer for my day-to-day work, we use abstractions all the time. And we both use abstractions that other developers have created for us because we don't need to understand what happens behind a particular piece of code. I might just need to interact with it, get a piece of data, and at the same time, I also create abstractions for people who use my code, and this could be the end users. I don't need somebody who is not non-technical to understand the code that is happening in the back end of the software. I just need them to be able to hit a button on their computer screen and see data displayed in front of them. And that is an abstraction that we create. So abstractions are incredibly powerful and very useful. But today I want to talk about how abstractions can become dangerous in the context of the way we abstract the relationships that we have in a society. And when I talk about relationships, I'm not just talking about personal relationships that you have with people you know immediately. I'm talking more broadly about supply chains and the butterfly effect of actions and reactions and cause and effect that we all play in making the world work the way it does. Now, I'm going to take you through a few scenarios, and I really want you to focus on what's the abstraction and what's actually happening behind the scenes. So let's take a simple example. When I walked into my room, I turned the light switch on. So I flicked a switch, I turned on a button, and the light in my room magically appeared. Now this is a very useful abstraction. All I need to know is I hit the button, the light comes on. And this is the same thing, like that example of helping a child buy an ice cream. We'd tell a child the same thing. But this is a very useful abstraction, because as far as all I care about, if I want to turn my light on, all I need to do is hit that switch. But there are more steps involved in that. An electricity bill needs to be paid, And in that electricity service, maybe 100 kilometers away from where I live, there might be a coal power station that is burning coal, and a further 500 kilometers from that coal power station, there might be somebody in the depths of the earth mining that coal. And there is this whole ecosystem that is happening and has happened to enable me to have this beautiful abstraction where I can hit a switch and the light comes on. The same goes for when I take my garbage out to my front door. Now, I live in a part of the world where we have great waste disposal. And it almost seems magical that I can take my garbage, put it in a plastic bag, put it in a bin, roll it to the front of my house, and then it magically disappears. Now, this is a wonderful abstraction. And as far as most people are concerned, all they need to do is move their garbage, place it in front of their house, and it will be taken away. But there is a big process in this. I may have had to pay my council rates. There would have had to be an administrative function which hired a waste disposal company to come and pick up my garbage. That garbage would have been then taken away, taken to a landfill. And there is, again, a whole process and so many people involved in enabling that abstraction for me. The same goes for when I turn on my tap. Now, I'm very privileged to have running water. When I open my tap, the water runs. Now, to provide me with the abstraction that I open my tap and water comes out, there has to be a water company. Somebody had to build a dam. This infrastructure needs to be maintained. Again, there is this whole sequence of events and people involved to enable this abstraction for me. And where I'm trying to go with these examples is one of the very first self-help books that I think I really kind of got me into the whole self-development space was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he talks about a very important concept called interdependence. And the reason I'm talking about abstractions today is I believe it's so crucial because in his book, he says that when you understand that you are interdependent, and I'll get to what that means, with other people, in society more broadly as a whole, you become very powerful. And I don't mean powerful in an evil way. I mean powerful in that you develop a sense of gratitude, which makes you glow and it gives you a type of power. And coming back to this concept of interdependence, really, it comes from, first of all, if you think about the word interdependence, there's two things happening there. You have the word dependence and you have the word independence, and it's somewhere in between. But how Covey explains this is when we're ineffective, we are dependent. And we believe that we're dependent and we might be dependent on other people. And we live in a society where people are coveted for being independent. People are coveted for being a strong, independent woman, a strong, independent black person, a strong, independent man. And we believe that the kind of pinnacle of self-development is to become an independent person. And when we feel like we've reached independence and we can do all these things ourselves, we feel incredibly powerful. So imagine having your own house where you can hit the light switch and you can open the water and the water comes out and you take the garbage out by yourself and you pay all these bills yourself. And as a result, you feel highly independent. And that independence stokes your ego. You feel like you can take the world. You don't need anybody else. But the only reason you might feel that way is because you have all these useful abstractions in your life which hide the fact that we are not independent at all. Very rarely, if ever, are you ever going to be independent in your whole life. And that's not to say you're dependent, but Covey talks about interdependence. And that is, we depend on each other. It is not a one-way thing. It is not just me depending on somebody else. There is a cycle of interdependence in that we all enable the abstractions that each other has access to. By me working as a software engineer, the end consumers of my product have a useful abstraction, but I am involved in maintaining that abstraction for them. But they in turn might not know that there's actually somebody and there's a team of other engineers who sit behind that product and who make sure that that useful abstraction works. And likewise, whilst I'm a software engineer, there is somebody who's working at the power plant, who's working at the coal mine, who's installing solar, who is providing that electricity so I can do my work. And you can see where I'm getting at. We live in a society where we're all connected by these little dots. And sometimes, especially as we rise through these status hierarchies and we feel very good and we have money in our bank account and we, start traveling by ourselves and doing all these fancy things that are associated with wealth and independence, and that's a big thing that's out there. I'm a strong, independent, insert demographic here in brackets. It all feels like a very powerful thing, but it is almost unappreciative of everything that sits outside of us. And one thing I've realized is sometimes it helps to try and scratch behind the abstractions, to see who sits behind those abstractions. That when the cleaners come through the office at 6:30 p.m. after most people have gone home, you actually acknowledge them. You speak to them. Because the abstraction that they provide for you is when you come back to your office the next day. You now have a clean, tidy, hygienic workspace. And for most people, that's just an abstraction. And I believe when we acknowledge what sits behind these abstractions, when we try to add the detail back in, it can make us more appreciative of what we have access to. And when we develop that gratitude and that appreciation, I believe there's an immense sense of power that exudes from us, and that people who don't understand that we're interdependent and we acknowledge we're interdependent and we all rely on each other. When people who don't have that mentality see you, their heads are going to start spinning. Why does this person understand the cleaner? Why do they interact with the cleaner the way they do? I wouldn't be caught dead with that person. What they don't see is you've scratched behind the abstraction and you have a sense of appreciation, which not only gives you kindness, but when those who sit behind the abstractions see that you actually care, there's a sense of power and connection that's created in that. So I'm going to end this episode with a prompt to all of you listening to this. What abstractions do you use in your day-to-day life? And who sits behind that abstraction or those abstractions? And what type of appreciation and gratitude can you cultivate towards those people? And it doesn't have to be you physically going up to them. It might not be possible for you to do that. But I think simply having that gratitude and that appreciation, it's going to change things. It's going to give you a power and allow you to see the world in a way that you haven't seen it before. So I'll end it there. And to everyone listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.